try my best not to get discouraged, and I try my best not to compare myself to anybody else, because where somebody else is at isn't necessarily where I should be at. So for people listening right now, I know this is like sort of like a cliche thing to say, but you are exactly where you're supposed to be at in life. Like, you're exactly where you're supposed to be at within your journey. And my journey right now is becoming like a new father. Like, that in itself is an entire journey, and it's taught me more than I could ever more than I can ever fucking ask for. It's taught me more than I could ever even imagine. But this podcast is also a giant journey, and it's not just like a journey to popularize this podcast or to become like a following beyond what I ever imagined. It's not just that. It's also like a starting putting yourself out there in the way that I put myself out here every week, and you do too now, being on this podcast, and everybody else that comes on this podcast, putting yourself out like that every single week and learning all these different skills. It teaches you a lot about yourself as a person.
Yeah.
So it teaches you, like, it'll actually expose your weaknesses, and it'll expose your strengths. So when I sit here and I talk hour after hour, day after day, I start to notice, okay, what comes up? What do I naturally gravitate to when I sit down and I'm searching for something to talk about, and I'm looking for a rant to kind of go off on, or I'm sort of messing around with everybody that's sitting here, you know? What do I naturally gravitate to? Do I gravitate towards talking about my previous drug addiction? Do I gravitate talking like post drug addiction? Do I gravitate towards talking about like gay shit if I'm fucking around with all the guys, you know? Like,
yeah.
Like, is that my way of being funny? And it teaches you all these little nuanced things about yourself, and it really helps to like form you as an adult, because when you're constantly thinking your thoughts, when you're constantly elaborating on thoughts and speaking them out loud, and your other people that are sitting across the table from you are elaborating on your thoughts as well, and you're going deeper and you're learning new stuff, you're discovering new things about the world and about other people and about the culture that we're in and about politics. You discover all these new things. That in itself is a huge fucking, what's the word I'm looking for? A giant, I don't know. My brain is fucking not working right now. But anyways, it's a giant push in the right direction, because you can't sit here and try to bullshit somebody for hour after hour, day after day.
Yeah.
Period. It's going to come out. And that's basically what I'm saying, is no matter what, like, things about yourself are going to come out, and it's my job to recognize those things and to notice those things, and to either adapt and overcome these little things that I start to notice by myself, or to embrace them and utilize them as a tool for this podcast. And or if like what the example that I gave with becoming a new father and learning how to do all of this raising a child, and handling fatherly duties, and learning how to be an actual dad, an actual father. So we've talked many times in this podcast about the difference between dads today and the difference between dads a generation ago or 2 generations ago.
Yeah.
We've discussed this a lot, because many of you listening know that I didn't grow up with a father. I grew up with a stepdad, but I've never met my father. And it's never affected me. It's never been something that is upsetting to me. I've never dwelled on it. I've never let it bother me like I've seen other people do. That's never happened to me until I got older. And it wasn't bad. It didn't happen in a bad way, but I started to notice myself wondering more and questioning more, and sort of it started to hit me a little bit more like, fuck, like, I don't actually have a dad. Like, now that I'm becoming a father,
when you're trying to recall certain things.
Right, yeah. Right. Now that I'm becoming a father, I've never had one to model myself after.
Yeah.
And a lot of men do. A lot of men do have fathers to model themselves after, to raise their children. My dad did this to me, so I'm going to raise my children like this.
Yeah.
For better or for worse.
Certain events, yeah.
For better or for worse, you know, it could be my dad did this, so I don't want to do this, or my dad did this, so I do want to do this, because obviously it worked for me, just helped me. Growing up in what I would call, one sec. Growing up in what I would call more or less a partially broken home, for a good portion of my life, I would say from about, probably started in like 7th grade.
Damn.
Where everything sort of started to fall apart. My mom sort of started to, it was almost like she couldn't like really handle it anymore. Like she couldn't, like that was sort of the end of her rope, and she snapped, and just sort of, we got old enough to fend for ourselves, more or less. You know, we were however old, you know, 12, 11. My brother's younger than me, so he was younger than that, 9, I think. He is how old he was. And it was sort of like she, whether she wanted to or not, you know what I mean? Like, it's almost like she didn't want to. And I could tell she was like fighting to hold on to it, and she was struggling for power. And we recognize that, being teenagers or preteens, almost teenagers, we recognized that we had the power and that we could do whatever we wanted, which that sort of pulled that away from my mom even more once we recognized that.
I got you.
So,
because in the back of my head, there was always that thought. When I was, you know, hanging out with the guys, I'm like, oh, I'm going to go do this. And be like, oh, that's not worth that fucking ass whooping when I get home. Right.
And that didn't exist for us. So, which led us to do a number of things, and ultimately led us down a path that I actually, you know, I wish I did have more discipline, and I wish I did have more structure growing up. So then maybe I would have got to where I was going a little quicker, instead of detouring off into drug addiction and off into partying and off into fucking terrible relationships, because all I seen growing up was bad relationships. And this is all shit that my mother raising me didn't think about. She didn't sit down and do what I'm doing right now. She didn't sit down and break down who am I as a parent. Most parents don't do that. Most parents don't have time for that. I don't have time for that, dude.
Yeah.
If you want me to be real with you, like, if it wasn't for this podcast, I don't have time to sit down every day and
go
and fucking think about, who am I as a parent?